Hi everyone, welcome to another Hatton's live stream session, and today we're covering one of our popular formations guides. Today we're looking at the railways of Scotland from the mid-1980s right through to the early 1990s. This is what we know as British Rail Modelling Era 8. So this is the era when British Rail went through its sectorisation, lots of different liveries came into place and lots of different locos came into use and fell out of use in this era too. Especially in Scotland, it really was a part of the British Rail network that saw the most change in this period. So there's some real traction variety that we can have today, from high-speed trains right through to smaller Type 2 diesel locomotives, and of course the odd steam locomotive for fans of steam railways in there too. So the area we're going to be taking a closer look at, as you can see here, is a bit of an area of contrasts when it comes to the Scottish railway system. You'll see at the bottom of our map on the screen here, the Central Belt as it is known. This is a highly populated area of Scotland with the two main cities of Glasgow and Edinburgh featured there, and the many lines between them, as well as the impressive suburban railway networks operated at this time by many different diesel and electric multiple units. Heading up the map, we see only a couple of lines heading off, but these are heading into the more rural areas of Scotland. We have some of the most famous railways inside the United Kingdom here, of course. Heading up to the middle left there, we have the West Highland line, forming the West Highland line to Fort William and the Fort William extension there to Mallaig. Just above that, on the top left, we have the line running from the Kyle of Locos, heading down to Inverness. And just off the top of our map, we have the Far North Line 2, heading up to Wick and Dbso. And then over on the right, we have the lines heading down through rural areas to the city of Aberdeen. So it really is a network of contrasts. You had the busy services running between the cities, and then you had the rural railways that were in operation too. And this gives rise to some fantastic formations that you can model. Local hauled services, as we see here, stayed on quite a bit longer on some of those rural routes. These were replaced mainly by diesel multiple units across the UK from the late 1950s onwards, but the Scottish rural routes did make things a little more challenging. The long distances between stations, the challenging gradients, the fact that a summer tourist train may need 5 or 6 coaches in the summer, but only 2 or 3 coaches in the winter, did mean that local haul trains were sticking around in this area for some time still, right into the 1980s, that we've chosen to model today. Of course, if you want to see the formations guide that I'm about to show you, do head over to the link in the description where all the information is there, as well as some of my top recommended products for you to recreate these yourselves in N gauge, double O gauge and O gauge too. So here's the guide. I will be showing this in some more detail too. I'll be showing some close-ups and speaking about some of the specific formations. But you can see here the sheer variety of colours on the screen already gives us some idea of what we are going to expect throughout today's show. So let's start with some of those services heading between the main cities. Let's have a look at the lines that run from Edinburgh to Glasgow up to Inverness on the Highland Main Line too, and other services that run to Aberdeen. Now, a lot of these were in the hands of the high-speed trains, especially trains that ran out of Scotland, heading down to destinations such as London, and on cross-country services down to the Midlands and beyond there too. So we'd see the Class 43, the power cars and the Mark III coaches at the start of this era in the blue and grey livery, but then forming into the Intercity 125 livery there too. You can just see that on our formations guide. It is the 5th one down there, this being a HST operating in 1988 in that interim Intercity executive livery between the Intercity Swallow and the BR blue and grey Intercity 125 colour scheme too. Everything else here is then a loco, but let's look at the third diagram there, as we don't actually have a loco at the front of it. The keen-eyed viewer will have noticed the Dbso there. Now, this is actually one of the first major styles of push-pull trains used in the UK. This was originally formed and ran between Edinburgh and Glasgow with top and tail Class 27 locomotives back in the 1970s. But by our era, we'd had one of the fastest regular loco hauled trains introduced on this line. These, of course, were the Class 47 7s. These were specific locomotives that were upgraded to run at 100 miles an hour, regularly returning between Edinburgh and Glasgow and later Inverness and Aberdeen. Through the day, you'll see there the communication cables added to the front of these locomotives to allow them to be operated push-pull, so you didn't have to waste time when you got to the terminus at either end of the line running ground. You did have a cab to control the locomotives there too. So the Class 47, you can see there on the screen. I've got one here on my layout. This is the Bachmann model, which has been produced in the ScotRail livery. There are models coming in the Helgen range too in 2021 in the ScotRail colour scheme that you see here. This would then be formed up with a rake of Mark III coaches, similar to what we see in the HST, but these being the loco hauled version. And these are provided in the ScotRail livery, as well as a couple of others by Oxford Rail in double O gauge. So you can pick those up and add to your formation here. You can, of course, get the driving brake coach, as you see here. This was converted from a Mark II air-conditioned vehicle, with the cab added to the end there to allow the driver to drive from the non-powered end that you can see. And these again are available in double O and N gauge from Bachmann and Graham Farish respectively. And if you keep an eye on our pre-owned section, these do appear from time to time on there, although they are a quite sought after model to go with the ScotRail livery that we see here. So these were the main express services running in our era, running between the main cities at up to 100 miles an hour. A lot of the suburban duties were performed by multiple units, such as the Class 314, the Class 303, the Class 311. Unfortunately, buying a model of one of these, you are looking at a kit at the moment, really, for a lot of the electric multiple units used on the suburban routes out of Glasgow and Edinburgh. But if you're looking for some of the multiple units, you can use the popular Class 101, again made by Hornby, Lima and Bachmann, and the Class 108, of which there has been a Class 107 made in double O gauge too. They're all quite familiar units used on some of those suburban areas. Let's head out to the more rural areas of the railways now. And this is where the scenery of Scotland really opens up to, with the lines running through the glens, through the valleys and the mountains, and alongside the sea in some cases too. So you can see here that some of these formations really did change dependent on the seasons and the traffic. Some of the rural lines would not see many passengers during the winter months, maybe workers, maybe oil rig workers or fishermen or local traffic. But in the summer, these lines would come alive and the loco hauled services would really prove their worth, with additional trains, with additional coaches used on these lines too. So let's head back over to our formations diagram and we can see some of these here. So we've got there a Class 20 locomotive, not usually seen on passenger duties across the UK, but found here on a section of line from Fort William to Mallaig on that West Highland line there, with a rake of 3 coaches performing a rural passenger duty. We also have the Class 27 locos. These are the Sulzer Type 2s. And these, again, were part of the fleet right through to the late 1980s. These particular locomotives were in place. These are very similar to the Class 26 locomotives, both of which were really well known by enthusiasts for being locomotives that you had to go to Scotland for to see. They weren't in operation on any other part of the network at this time. And Helgen do produce these locomotives, both the Class 26 and 27, with their individual differences, as you can see on the models here, available to pick up now in the BR Blue livery that starts us off in the 1980s. and then heading right through there into the colour schemes from the early 1990s when it comes to the 2060s too. So these locomotives again could be found working on some of the loco hauled passenger duties, of which there was a higher percentage on the lines, again heading out onto those rural networks. Of course, one to mention, we can't ignore it, we've already shown a photo of it, is the West Highland line, which alongside the Far North Railways running out of Inverness became very well known for running the Class 37 locomotives in this era. With specific locomotives, there was 25 of these Class 37-4 locomotives brought into Scotland for these particular duties, with 6 more heading over to Wales. These were fully upgraded with electric train heating supply, so they could work throughout the year on these loco hauled services, and these are probably one of the most popular locomotives to have ran in Scotland during this era. You can just about see on the side of this model, these locos were very quickly individualized by their own depots, and as you can see here on the side of this locomotive, the Bachmann model of 37401, you can see that it's already gained an appropriate Scottish name, as well as the symbol there, the West Highland Terrier dog, which was placed on locomotives allocated to the Eastfield depot in Glasgow. So within a couple of days, in some cases, these locomotives had been made into very Scottish locomotives, as you can see on the screen here. And this again just adds to the charm of recreating this era on your layout. So you can pick up the 37s in quite a few different scales from quite a few different suppliers. We have, of course, the Helgen Class 37-4, scheduled for a re-release in that popular large logo blue livery. The Bachmann model does come through from time to time. We're also looking forward to seeing the Acura scale model of the 37-0. This is the steam heat versions, which were still used on some summer passenger and freight duties during the late 1980s and early 1990s, again in some very appropriate Scottish liveries here, named after various locks found in the Scottish Highlands. And again, if you want to check out any of the locomotives I'm showing here today, or you want to see the diagrams in more detail, do head over to the link in the description where there is a little more information. So just a quick recap of some of the duties that we can see here. We've seen our smaller Type 1 and Type 2 locomotives making their rare appearances on some of the passenger duties found in some of the more rural areas. We have also seen the push-pull duties there performed by the Class 47-7 locomotives, the Class 37-4 heading there on its trip to Fort William, the international services running out of Scotland on the King's Cross to Aberdeen there with the HST, also used on the cross-country duties. Another locomotive standing there, the Class 37 making its appearance again. And finally, the all-important mail duties too, with another Class 47 locomotive. I'll just pull up another example of a ScotRail branded loco here, carrying the intercity livery, but ScotRail again making its presence felt on its locomotives by applying the ScotRail branding. I believe this is at Aberdeen or Dundee, but I'm up for someone correcting me on that one. I've got to say I'm not 100% sure on where that location is. I'll say thanks in advance for someone putting that down in the comments there. As a final footnote on the passenger side of the operations today, multiple units were starting to take over in the rural areas towards the late 1980s, and these were mainly formed of the Class 156 Super Sprinter multiple units. These took over the rural lines heading up to Fort William and Mallaig, also services on the lines to the Kyle of Lochalsh and Terso and Wick. Of course, you can pick up the real track models, Class 156, in this provincial livery with Scottish destinations right now, and that is the ideal replacement for a lot of these loco hauled services. But for a few years, they did run alongside each other, especially in the summer, where those longer trains were needed again, and the locos were brought back out of retirement to work with the coaches they had once hauled before again. We see here the Mark II coaches. Now, these would have originally been in the BR blue and grey. As you can see, By this time, they have been refurbished, one there in regional railways, and the rest of the rake being painted in the Kyle line green and cream, purely for the tourist traffic. So you did still find the locomotives working into the early 1990s in some of the sector liveries. And of course, there's far too many models of those to mention here, but do head over to the links in the description for some more information there. Fantastic question there too from Thomas, asking regarding the Caledonian Sleeper. And yes, this was something that was in operation at this time. Towards the start of our era, these had just been introduced with the Intercity Mark III coaches that we see here. These require their own train supply, the electric heating and electric train supply, for which, if you watch this morning's stream, you'll already know about the Class 25 Ethel locomotives, converted Class 25s, which were used then to supply electric train power and electric train heat to the sleeper trains for a few years there too. So these services with the Class 25s headed up to Fort William, and of course the Mark III coaches there ran to Inverness, Aberdeen and Fort William too. You can see here one of Hornby's scheduled models for 2021, the return of the Intercity Sleeper in the blue-grey livery as they would have carried at this time. So let's take a little bit of a look at freight. This is something that's just as important, serving many of those rural lines again, with pretty much the livelihood for a lot of the businesses along this route. Here's some examples. So you can see the oil industry, very important to Scotland, with its various oil rigs and oil refineries working here. You can see a purely oil train of TTA tankers with our Class 37 at the top of the diagram here. Class 37 we've covered a few times on today's stream, but the TTA wagons you can pick up from Pico in Engage and a variety of different suppliers, including Hornby and Bachmann in Dbso. Again, check out our pre-owned listings for these, as you may find some of the colour schemes that are very sought after indeed. Other services that ran at this time are what's called the Speedlink operation. So this would be many different freight services rolled into one trip. So pretty much the steam era pickup goods, but in a 1980s and 1990s flavour. This is a great opportunity to model a small rake, as we see here with our Class 26 locomotive, with a variety of coal hoppers, an oil tank there again, and an open wagon, most likely used for the transportation of steel. Just to recap there, thank you, Gary. I knew that someone had come up for me there in the chat. Gary has mentioned that our Class 47 before was at Stirling. So I wasn't right on either location, but Gary is spot on there. So thank you, Gary. So let's head back to the freight. Of course, you had the coal services there too, the merry-go-round trains as they are known, operating with the HAA coal hoppers. These and the large logo Class 56 are available again after quite a few years in 00 scale as part of Hornby's 2021 list. So you can pre-order those right now to be able to recreate these coal services running from the mines to the coal power stations and, of course, some of the steel mills there too, especially in the southern areas of Scotland. Also, we have another one of our Speedlink operations here. This particular version comes with some of the Silver Bullet wagons, often known to have worked in Cornwall. There was a service that ran these from Cornwall right into the Scottish Highlands to be able to supply the paper mills near Fort William with China clay for the paper making process there. So you can pick up the Silver Bullet wagons if you check out the range from Dapol. They're available in 00 and Engage, and they're a fantastic model too. They really are worth a closer look. There were some other vehicles built specifically for freight traffic that only really happened in Scotland. We see here the Ota Timberwagon, used, as I'm sure I'm about to surprise you, for transporting timber across the railways of Scotland from the various forestries in the Highlands right down into the lower areas there too. Great question coming up in the chat there. I'll just pull that one up so you can all see it. King Orida regarding Speedlink and Enterprise. There were some very minor differences between the two. It covers very slight different eras. But yes, it is basically the same thing. It is worth a bit of a read into if you want to find out some more about it. But generally, if you think of Speedlink, you can think of Rail Freight Enterprise there too. But looking back at some of these timber wagons, you will find these all across the Scottish Railways, introduced in the 1980s, a very similar body end construction and an underframe construction to the VAA van, but specifically made for carrying timber with the stanchions there, making sure that none of the timber fell out of the wagons during transit. You can pick these models up from Hornby. There isn't one available new at the time of recording, but we do get them very regularly indeed on our pre-owned section, so do head over there for a closer look. But as you can see, there's just a huge amount of variety, not only in the different types of locomotives, whether we're looking at small or large diesel locomotives, the sheer variety in liveries there too, from the familiar BR Blue, which takes us right back to the 1960s, some brand new colour schemes coming in during this era, with the vibrant ScotRail identity and brand being applied to pretty much every item of rolling stock carried on the network. And even those in some of the more familiar BR liveries did get their own touches too, to make sure it was well known that they were part of the network that you can see. So if you do want to find out more about modelling the Scottish Railways of the 1980s, or any of the models that I've shown here today, please don't hesitate to head over to the link in the description. You can see the full formations guide as you see it here, but you'll also have buttons to click where we recommend models for each of the items of rolling stock we show here, regardless of scale, whether it is an N gauge model, a double O gauge model, or an O gauge model there too. We've seen some great photos today with some inspiration, and some of these again are available on our website, showing some of the different locomotives, different rakes, and of course the all-important colour schemes that we mentioned there previously too. All the models we've shown here today are either available right now or available on our pre-owned department at the time of recording. So if you have seen something you're specifically interested in, do head over to the website or get in touch with our customer experience team, who'd be more than happy to give you a helping hand there too. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and of course follow our Facebook page for all the latest model railway news too. Otherwise, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.